Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Happy Friday. We are coming to you live on September 27th, and we are going to be breaking down last night's Thursday night football matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants, which was ultimately a competitive game, but some real red flags from both sides in this game that I want to dive into, as well as some crucial injury updates that we're going to be providing the latest news on there. So we are going to be breaking down all things with that Thursday night football matchup, and then we are going to be looking ahead to the remainder of the weekend in the NFL. I want to talk about some of the top storylines and questions that could be answered this upcoming weekend with the slate of games that we have on our hands. And then additionally, I am going to be providing my top 5 bets against the spread for this upcoming weekend as well. Riding pretty solid so far. 3 winning weeks up to this point, hoping to keep that trend going. And then finally, we are going to end off the show switching gears a little bit and going into the NBA, where just yesterday we saw the Denver Nuggets have their media day. And the Nuggets, after winning the championship in 2023, was a bit of a disappointing exit in the postseason in the conference semifinals last year. So there were some interesting comments made from head coach Michael Malone and general manager Calvin Booth that I want to dive into as well. Talk about what it means for the upcoming approach for the Nuggets for both this season and the years to come. So a whole lot to dive into, but before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To anybody in the comment section here, be sure to leave your thoughts down below so that we can make this show as interactive as possible. We love hearing what you guys have to say, whether it be just a quick comment or a thoughtful question. Let us know what your thoughts are on the latest happenings in sports, and we will try to address as much as we possibly can. And then if you would like to become an even bigger part of the show, you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube by leaving a comment, and along with a tip or donation, your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. You can additionally do the same using the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. But without further ado here, last night, the Dallas Cowboys defeated the New York Giants 20-15 on Thursday Night Football. Like we talked about here, it was a little bit of a messy game in different senses for both of these teams, but ultimately, the important thing for the Cowboys is they got the win, and they were able to sort of get themselves back on the right track. Now, this was not a super convincing game necessarily, but ultimately coming off of 2 very disappointing home losses, the Cowboys were against the Saints and then against the Ravens. For Dallas, it just feels like at least they're back on track to some degree, but there were a lot of real concerns, in my opinion, in this game. They were outgained by the Giants actually as a whole. They only forced the Giants to punt once, so their defense did a pretty good job of bend, don't break, but still would have preferred to see, I don't know, I can't even really pin this on the defense necessarily. I mean, the Giants were able to move the ball unquestionably. This felt like, to me, more so that only putting up 20 points against the Giants defense that has a good front seven. And that's something that we talked about before. That is the strength of this New York, really, team as a whole, I would argue, is the front seven for the Giants. And they were able to, move the ball decently well, but a couple 3-and-outs, like I mentioned, they ended up being outgained by the Giants altogether. And I think that it is more so about the fact that their offense just wasn't able to necessarily put together sustainable drives as much as the Giants were on the other end, which is another bit of a concern there. The offensive line play is something that I still really do think is an issue for this Cowboys team. You saw, and again, tough front seven, we can acknowledge that, but the likes of Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence as well in the middle, really causing issues for Dallas's O-line. I thought that specifically on the left side of the offensive line, rookie Tyler Guyton, who the Cowboys drafted in the first round this past year, he sort of got it handed to him for a lot of the night. Ultimately, he had, I think it was 3 flags, 1 sack allowed, a tackle for a loss allowed, I think a couple of those actually, and some pressures. So I think that there are concerns on the offensive line. The Cowboys were at least able to run the ball better in the second half. Now, at the end of the game, when they were sort of trying to milk the clock and the Giants understood that the Cowboys were going to run the ball and it was a lot more obvious in those situations, Cowboys definitely struggled more there. That is to be expected. But, overall, I think that it was just kind of the poor offensive line play and the poor discipline in general. 11 penalties for the Cowboys in this game, a lot of those on the offensive line as well, but just sort of continued to hurt themselves, and they actually got bailed out, it seemed like, on a couple occasions, specifically early on in the game, in terms of some penalties that sort of went in their favor. It looked like at one point the refs just entirely called a face mask on the wrong team, where it was Bellinger of the Giants who seemed to get grabbed in the face mask, I believe it was DeMarvion Overshown, and then when they actually called the play, they said that it was Bellinger who was in the face mask. I think that was just a little bit of a misspeak there that actually, resulted in a 30-yard swing and negated what would have been a pretty solid Giants drive, sort of ended up killing them there. There was a holding call as well in the red zone that was picked up. Not that I hated it, and not that by any means I think that Giants fans can sit here this morning and say that it was entirely on the refs, but it was more so just sort of bringing up the idea of the referees being involved. It was because the Cowboys didn't really play all that disciplined of a game, and that's something that I think is going to continue to hurt them if they can't correct that. It sounded like behind the scenes as well, according to ESPN, that there really wasn't much celebration in that Cowboys locker room. Didn't feel like it was a convincing performance where, you get back in the win category, which is obviously a good thing coming off of back-to-back losses. But this is a game, especially coming into the year, the Cowboys themselves probably would have figured that they were able to sort of roll over the Giants more significantly than they were. Now, divisional matchup, those are never easy. They actually just came, one Brandon Aubrey field goal kick away from covering, which was kind of a crazy situation there, considering Aubrey up to that point had been 16 of 16 on field goals, 50 yards or more, ended up missing with about 30 seconds left to sort of blow the cover for anybody who did have money there. So either way here, I don't think that this was a dominant win for the Cowboys. It was a needed one, but I think there are a lot of things to still have questions about with Dallas moving forward, especially considering the fact that they saw some crucial injuries on the defensive side of the ball occur in that second half. First, it was DeMarcus Lawrence, the defensive end / tackle for them, that he ended up going down with a foot injury, was sitting there on the sideline with his cleat off, and it was just reported on within the past 20 minutes from Tom Pelissero of DeMarcus Lawrence is expected to miss multiple weeks with that foot injury that he suffered. On top of that as well, Micah Parsons suffered a high ankle sprain. So it sounds like both of Lawrence and Parsons are going to be out until at least after that bye week for Dallas on week 7, again, according to Tom Pelissero there. So definitely some tough losses. And Dallas, they could definitely use racking up some wins here because their schedule is going to, continue to be more difficult. Now, ultimately, they're going to get Deron Bland at some point back as well, which can be a big boost for this team as well. But a defense that has been a little bit underwhelming, at least in weeks 2 and 3 specifically. this week playing against the Giants offense that we know they have their own issues in terms of actually being able to put the ball in the end zone. But again, the Giants sort of drove up and down. Now, we're going to be diving into the Giants side of this equation shortly here. But for the Cowboys, again, there's only so much you can come out of this. The bright side is that Dak Prescott, start to finish, did look pretty good, all things considered. 22 of 27, 221 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I thought that he did a much better job of sort of coming out of the gates a little bit more prepared. That was a situation that we saw last week, especially where, the Cowboys these past 2 weeks just let opposing teams jump on them out of the gates, and then it's on the defense to start making stops. Dak Prescott almost gets a little bit of a pass because you can make the argument, well, he never really stood a chance because the defense didn't come to show up. But it's also on him, who is now making $60 million, is the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, that he has to be a tone setter a little bit. And the other guy that needs to be a tone setter is CeeDee Lamb. And that is where you sort of start to build on these positives that we saw CeeDee Lamb sort of back and incorporated into this offense. This was a situation where, of course, coming off of last week when there was that little bit of an outburst on the sideline of CeeDee Lamb yelling at Dak Prescott, that Lamb himself said that he needed to reflect on the type of leader he is, and he came out in this game. The Cowboys were force-feeding him early. He had 5 touches within the first 2 drives, including a halfback toss, essentially, to him. Of course, wide receiver. But they were using him out of the backfield as well. He ended up with 3 carries, and he had a reception out of the backfield. Interesting play there. I believe it was in the 3rd or 4th quarter, where he and Ezekiel Elliott both lined up in the backfield. They motioned Zeke out to the left side, and then it was essentially CeeDee Lamb coming out of that backfield, running a little bit of a curl and getting a catch there. So he finished this game with 7 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown. Still yet to have 100 receiving yards in a game so far this season, but if you include the rushing totals as well, did go over the 100-yard mark, so you can, I suppose, hold it against him that he didn't catch for 100 yards just yet. But CeeDee Lamb had his fingerprints all over this, and then it was a little bit more so, I thought, the Giants' defensive breakdown when he did score his touchdown. Now, he very cleanly beat Deonte Banks down the left sideline to get open there and have Dak deliver it on time. It was then just also a horrendous angle taken by Giant safety Tyler Nubin, where he way over pursued to the outside, just giving CeeDee basically the entire middle of the field of an open lane to finish off the job there. Went for a 55-yard touchdown. And even if it was a little bit on the Giants breakdown, I mean, that's just what you need out of your star players, is to capitalize on those opportunities. That hadn't really been the case for the past couple weeks. So seeing him and Dak back on the same page, really encouraging. I would also add as well the fact that Jake Ferguson has, since coming back from injury where he was out week 2 after being injured in week 1, he's put together back-to-back solid weeks for him. It's not like he's going to give you the explosive plays like a CeeDee Lamb, but just having another option to throw to reliably is a big difference maker for this Cowboys offense. And Ferguson, again, 7 catches on 7 targets, 49 yards. It's not like you're getting a ton out of him from an explosive play situation, but just having that reliability, because right now it does feel a little bit CeeDee Lamb or bust. Now, I did mention the running game, that I thought that they got better as the game went on. The offensive line maybe warmed up a little bit more. And Rico Dowell, I mean, it wasn't an incredible performance from him. 11 carries for 46 yards. Still not great necessarily, but Cowboys, I think that ultimately speaking here, if you can get 4 yards a carry. Zeke in the second half as well had some solid runs for him as well. One of them as well that got called back because of Cooper Beebe, their rookie center, ended up picking a holding penalty. So I think that ultimately speaking, this was a fine game for the Cowboys, and it is a divisional game matchup on the road. So you can't, just because I don't think that the Giants are good, doesn't mean that, you can just sort of roll over the fact that this is a divisional matchup on the road. But I think that ultimately the Cowboys still have a lot of proving to do of themselves, and it only becomes that much more difficult knowing that two of your best players on defense are injured for the foreseeable future in Parsons and Lawrence, like I mentioned, already without Deron Bland. I do think that Trayvon Diggs is supposed to be okay. He went to the locker room last night based off of what they call dehydration, so he should be fine long term, but in the time being, I think we're going to need to see a lot more from Dallas's offense to sort of keep them afloat. Next week, they are in Pittsburgh, which is going to be a very difficult matchup to be able to put up points on that defense that I believe is yet to allow more than 10 points in a game. So it's going to be definitely a lot more pressure on Dak and that offense to get themselves going. Pressure on Mike McCarthy as well to make sure that they are doing a good enough job of feeding CeeDee Lamb. I really liked what they were doing with him, using him in the backfield, putting him in different locations as opposed to in week 3 when he was just sort of lining up on the outside and you hope that he can make somebody miss. Get him closer to Dak. You know that the pressure isn't necessarily, or the offensive line protection isn't necessarily great for them, that this is going to have to be sort of the CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott show in order for the Cowboys to stay competitive on a regular basis and potentially, keep themselves alive for being in that playoff hunt. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. I do want to look on the other side of this game, talk about the New York Giants, who once again had a very lackluster offensive performance. I did mention that they outgained the Cowboys, so there are positives to take out of this game to some degree, but the frustrations with Daniel Jones continue to build up. I want to dive into that and more, but first we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shock Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to break down the Thursday night football game between the Cowboys and the Giants. We just talked on the Dallas side of things. On the other end, there are a couple different ways you can look at this game for the Giants because they did come in, at least when we recorded yesterday, they were 6-point underdogs. I believe that the line moved to 5 points by kickoff, but either way, not a game that the Giants were expected to win, especially coming into the season. You sort of feel like the Cowboys are on a different playing field than the Giants, but they kept things very competitive throughout, which I do think is a good sign for the Giants. The pessimistic person, and I'm seeing a lot of negativity towards the Giants this morning online, is the fact that they did go a second game out of 4 weeks so far that they have not scored an offensive touchdown. And that ultimately falls on the shoulders of Daniel Jones, who has been, I think to some degree, a scapegoat over the years for the Giants, that they have been a largely flawed roster and he's just been sort of keeping them alive. I don't think you can totally make that same argument this year. The Giants do have a lot more talent on the offensive side of the ball. You look at the emergence of Malik Nabers, he's been incredible these past few weeks in this game. 12 receptions and 115 yards. Now, he did leave late with a concussion. So he might, you get a little bit of a mini bye week playing on Thursday night this week. The Giants wouldn't play again until, I believe, next Sunday, as I'm double checking the schedule here. Yeah, next Sunday in Seattle. So he will probably be questionable for that game. But either way, definitely a huge positive to see how much of an impact Malik Nabers has had so early in the season, and that's huge for them. They are awfully reliant on him, which to some degree, just get the ball in the hands of your best player. I understand that, but you also look at that sort of stretch of plays in the fourth quarter where Malik Nabers, he had the fourth down conversion, and then they went right back to Nabers on back-to-back plays that ultimately, he ended up being really gassed at the end of that. A couple times his teammates had to sort of pick him up off the turf, and I believe that might have been his last catch was that loss of one on the third play of that sequence that I'm referring to. But, I think that I understand, get the ball in the hands of him. It's very clear as well, though, that they do need sort of other players to step up for them. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson does appear to be emerging as a legitimate number 2 option for them, a former second-round pick in this game. He also has double-digit catches, 11 for 71. Maybe not quite as much of the explosive upside as a Malik Nabers, but, you now have a couple legitimate options to sort of surround Daniel Jones with. Now, Devin Singletary didn't do much of anything in this game, 14 carries for 24 yards. I thought he was still overall very solid for them. He had a couple of huge runs. The one specifically was the 4th and inches where he looked like he was dead to rights in the backfield and ended up being able to spin away from a defender. It was Donovan Wilson coming off of the left edge, untouched. Singletary was able to spin out of that, get to the outside, and sort of high step his way to the first down. Thought that there were a couple positive runs in there. Did a fine job in pass pro as well as a blocker, but really just didn't have many opportunities for him in front of it. And should have mentioned this on the more Cowboys side of this equation as well, is that the Cowboys, for being the worst statistical run defense in the NFL coming into this game, did do an excellent job of bottling up Singletary and that entire Giants rushing attack. 24 carries for 26 yards. That is abysmal if you're on the Giants, but that is something that we sort of keyed in on as we previewed this game yesterday, that the Cowboys needed to do so, and they did it. And that's the thing, is the run game was non-existent, so there are a lot of people now this morning sort of seemingly fed up with Daniel Jones, and I understand to some degree that there is a very clear lack of playmaker with Daniel Jones, where he's pretty efficient. Last night he was solid for the majority of the night, 29 of 40, 281 yards and an interception. The interception came basically on a prayer deep shot right at the end of the game, so I don't even necessarily hold that against him. But you now talk about the fact that there are some solid receiver options in Nabers and Robinson, and then you want to throw Darius Slayton in there as well, who Slayton on a couple of occasions beat Dallas defenders downfield, and Jones just does not seem to have the arm strength whatsoever to really be able to deliver these downfield strikes, where there was one play where there was somebody, Jeremy Lapidus of the Sports by GSMC podcast, he talked about it could have been caught. This was during a production meeting we had. It definitely could have been caught. It hit Slayton in the hands, but it was also very much an underthrown ball, and this was a situation where, he had a lot of room in front of him. And then additionally, earlier in the game, there was a free play where Jones, a couple times, by the way, a little Rodgers-esque of getting the Cowboys defense to jump off sides and get some free plays for themselves. He had another opportunity where Slayton beat Trayvon Diggs on the right side, but Jones just, again, massively underthrew him, and it ended up being an interception that was called back because of the free play, so no harm, no foul there. But you're talking about, okay, it wasn't an interception. It definitely could have been a touchdown, though, if Jones delivers that sort of where it should have been. And that's the thing, is just the complete lack of really having a quarterback with that type of downfield talent. Now, that doesn't mean that Daniel Jones is a definitively bad quarterback. That, again, I think the efficiency is solid for him. Not that he was really using his legs last night, but there is at least some element of mobility there. But all of that being said, when you are going almost $48 million against the cap, that's where you have to be able to make open plays like that when they are downfield, and that those redeeming qualities just aren't necessarily there. So we can say that I don't think that Daniel Jones was bad last night, but when you're talking about Jones coming into this season, basically this is not quite a contract year for him. He has 2 more years on his deal, but neither of them fully guaranteed, and the Giants have an out in his contract this upcoming offseason, and I find it very hard to imagine that they are going to pass up on that, because I wouldn't want to pay Daniel Jones, above $40 million moving forward. It would be $41.6 million against the cap in 2025, and then that would jump all the way up to $58.6 million in 2026. And that is just not the level of quarterback play you're getting from him. Where, again, I think he's scapegoated. I think that there are still a lot of issues on this team. They did a much better job, I think, ultimately speaking, of being able to keep him on his feet and the offensive line not being quite a disaster. That is obviously a very good defensive front, specifically the edge rushers of Parsons and Lawrence on that front end to be able to generate pressure there. And all things considered, they did a very good job, in my opinion, of keeping Jones, for the most part, pressure-free in this game. You are seeing the development of Andrew Thomas, who now is a legitimate, go-to left tackle that was able to shut down Micah Parsons for the majority of this game. Got absolutely tossed at one point by Parsons on a specific run play, but again, you talk about this idea that Daniel Jones, for years, I have been on board with. I think that he gets a lot of slack and that there's a lot more factors outside of his play alone that are contributing to the Giants not being a good team, and that we're starting to see, the key developments from the remainder of the roster. We're not seeing those steps forward of improvement from Daniel Jones. And that's where I just think it's sort of written in the stars at this point that they are eventually going to move off from him after this season. Now, a lot of people as well calling for the benching of Daniel Jones. The reality is, I don't think that they're any better off with Drew Lock starting these games. I mean, Drew Lock anyways, it would be somewhat of a miracle if he developed into a legitimate franchise quarterback for the Giants that made them pass up on using their draft pick this upcoming year on a quarterback. I just don't think that that's a realistic outcome. So I do feel like Daniel Jones makes you more competitive in the now, and as much as, maybe there are Giants fans out there who say, who cares, just sort of tank the season out and try and get a better draft pick next year, Brian Daboll is still to some degree coaching for his job. Now, I've said on the show a number of times that I think that that's a little bit of an unfair mark against Brian Daboll because the team has been so bad and there is such limitation. But that's also where you look at Jones in this game. And I, at least from my own tally, when I went back and rewatched the game this morning, there were 9 occasions where Jones threw on third down, threw it significantly short of the line to gain, and that's not even including this one other pass to Wan'Dale Robinson that, did ultimately end up being marked short, but it was right at that sort of yard line to gain. So I didn't even include that in there as well, but there's just a complete lack of, aggression with this offensive attack. Now, it's definitely partially on Daniel Jones, knowing that he can't necessarily deliver those deep strikes. I think it's also a little bit on Brian Daboll. I understand that he's made it very clear to everybody that he doesn't trust Daniel Jones, that, he's kind of, mad about the situation. That's who they're paying so much money to. But also, you were part of the core that decided to give him that contract. And, at some point, it's just excuse making. You got to be able to develop a game plan that continues to extend drives, because they were 3 for 3 on their first fourth down shots, and they never turned any of those possessions into touchdowns, where they ended up settling for field goals on every one of them, where I feel like there's a lot of bad coaching in the NFL. That's the thing, is you can't have it both ways. I think it was smart of him for more times than not to just take the points, but that's the thing, is this is your former coach of the year and somebody who was receiving all the praise in the world after 2022 when he brought the Giants to the playoffs, and we've just seen a complete, I don't know if I would consider it a lack of innovation with that offense, but we are very much lacking any sort of, explosiveness. Now, Malik Nabers is going to be able to sort of change that up to some degree, and he will be able to just inherently in himself. I mean, you look at that first drive and one of the third down conversions of him snapping the ankles of Andrew Booth, the young cornerback there on the outside. So Malik Nabers inherently will bring some of those explosive plays, but you can't just be reliant on one player to do it all for you, whether it's Daniel Jones and him stepping up more, or if it's Brian Daboll needing to sort of change things. And he took responsibility for the fact that they were so ineffective in the run game. He talked about how he needed to be better and that they tried some different things and none of it really worked for them. So this is obviously an entire team process, but the Giants offense just not living up to the standard that they should be. And give credit to the defense on the other end, because they were the reason why this was a game throughout. That front seven was excellent. They, other than really that breakdown from Banks and Newman on the back end for the 55-yard CeeDee Lamb touchdown, I thought that they played very well and were causing havoc for that young, inexperienced Cowboys offensive line. So the Giants are not a complete dumpster fire at this point. There are things for them to continue to build on, but the pressure is sort of heating up on a number of different people within that building. It's specifically Daniel Jones, Brian Daboll, and general manager, blanking on his first name, but Joe Shane sounds right. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section, as I sort of want to move on here now to the remainder of the games for this Week 4 NFL slate. And I want to talk about some of the games that can specifically answer questions for the common NFL fan based off of how these teams perform this upcoming weekend. So we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that
alles definiert, you choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we just finished recapping the Thursday Night Football matchup between the Cowboys and the Giants. And now I want to look ahead here to the remainder of the Week 4 slate in the NFL and talk about the biggest games and biggest moments specifically that could potentially answer some questions for NFL fans this weekend. And one of the probably the number one game that I have circled at this point, at least in the early slate, is how for real are the Vikings at this point, and can they win the NFC North? Because I would hesitate to say that the Vikings are more of a Super Bowl contender than the Packers, but we're now getting to a point here where the Vikings, off to their 3-0 start, now have a chance to sort of roll into Lambeau and make they've already made statements, so it's unfair of me really to say, how legitimate are they? But it's more so about, is this a team that can actually win the division? It's been an excellent start so far. Wins against San Francisco and Houston are massive for their resume, but at the end of the day, this is a very competitive NFC North division, and if they can sort of strike while the iron's hot, while they're riding all of this momentum, and while Jordan Love's status is still a little bit to be determined. Now, it seems like, especially just looking at the betting line for this game, the Packers favored by 3, that would sort of indicate that it sounds like Jordan Love is going to play in this game, which lines up with the timeline as well that we were sort of first given when he went down in that injury, with the injury in that game against the Eagles. So it would sort of make sense that Jordan Love is going to play in this game. But that being said, I have a hard time imagining he is going to be at his sharpest. And the Vikings, if you can say one thing about what this Vikings team has been these past couple of years, it is an extremely aggressive defense. And that is under the control of Brian Flores, who, again, sort of is now all of a sudden maybe making a name for pushing himself back into head coaching candidacy this upcoming offseason. I'm sure he'll get at least a couple of interviews, and this is a very talented Vikings defense at this point. Again, I talked about this yesterday on the show. I do feel like Brian Flores deserves a ton of credit for being able to have this level of success with the Vikings defense these past couple of years. I would even more so specifically look at last season in comparison to this year, because I just don't think that people are all that aware of how talented this group is. Now, what I would definitely like to see them have a little bit more of known substances in the secondary, but you look in that front seven with the likes of a Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, a Blake Cashman, all of these guys that they brought in. Ivan Pace is going to be out for this game, so that's definitely a tough loss for them, but they have some legitimate playmakers on their defense now, and specifically in that front seven where they can bring the heat. And I think that they are going to do so against the Packers this upcoming weekend. And ultimately for the Vikings, like I mentioned, it's not like I view them as a true Super Bowl contender at this point, but it gets a ton easier if they're able to play at home in their dome, especially for the sake of Sam Darnold, who's been great up to this point in the year, but I think it's fair to have some reservations about how great actually is he now. And I think that ultimately, they probably don't view themselves as a Cinderella run, and it will be hard to if they are able to even host one playoff game. Again, NFC North, very tough situation to sort of work your way out of, but I do think that this is a situation for the Vikings where it's a golden opportunity for them to make a statement to that division and continue to gain the high ground moving forward this year in regards to trying to take home a surprise division title. Looking elsewhere in the NFC, after an offensive dud last week, are we going to look at the first 2 weeks of the season of Saints football as an anomaly or as a sign for things to come? Like I mentioned, last week against the Eagles, it was very ugly overall. And I do feel like this is a situation where, especially after losing their starting center, Eric McCoy, that is a name that, not a household name by any means, but is a very important loss to this Saints team that is very reliant on the run game and the play action coming out of that the Saints now, they're going to have a game against a tough division rival in the Falcons and a good defense. And I think that we all sort of understood it's not like we can expect 40 points a game out of this Saints team. But last year, this is kind of what they were, is they would have moments of brilliance. Then when things sort of got off script and they were sort of not given quite as easy of a path, Derek Carr kind of turned more so into the Derek Carr that we've seen for the majority of the past few seasons. And I'm rooting for him. I think that he has a lot of talent, but the limitations with him are definitely at least in the back of the minds, I think, of the majority of NFL fans. And this is a week where, listen, if they come out and do play another low-scoring game against the Falcons, it's not like it means that the Saints can never, be back to being a high-scoring team. But this is a situation, we were having conversations of, can this offense be elite, one of the top tiers in the NFL? And I am a lot more skeptical on it after last week, after the injury to McCoy, seeing the limitations of Carr and somebody like Rashid Shaheed as well, who was sort of becoming a darling once again, as he does every once in a while when he does, rip off these deep touchdowns that seem to come sporadically through the past couple years. But ultimately, is the Saints offense to be taken seriously on a week-to-week basis, or were they just more a product of their schedule early on? That's something that I am definitely keeping my eye on. Another game here, are the Chiefs done messing around? Because this is a situation where the past few weeks, listen, everybody's discourse around the Chiefs seems to be in one of two places. The Chiefs are the Chiefs that they have been the past couple years, that they are still the best team in the NFL, and everybody else is just sort of, rummaging for their shot to take down the champs. Or there's this other camp now disbelieving in the Chiefs and talking about, they only won because of the refs. They haven't necessarily won a game handedly yet. Both sides have some sort of legitimacy to it. This upcoming week, I think we can get more of a definitive answer. Now, because the Chiefs played three good teams tough in the Ravens, the Bengals, and the Falcons. I know what the records say for those three teams, that none of them have a winning record at this point, and the Bengals are winless even to add on to that. I do still think that those are three quality wins for the Chiefs. Now, if you want to dispute me on it, I don't think that, we're just going to see eye to eye on that, but that's not even important. This is a game against the Chargers that are ravished with injuries. You look on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's very unlikely that Justin Herbert is going to be able to play in this game, dealing with that high ankle sprain, not to mention the fact that both of his starting offensive tackles in Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt are going to be out for the next couple weeks, that I'm sure Jim Harbaugh is chomping at the bit to be able to sort of show the Chiefs that the Chargers aren't going to be the pushovers that they have been in recent years. I just don't think that this is going to be the week for them. Chiefs are currently 7-point favorites, and this is a situation where I think that they have to win convincingly. You look on the defensive side of the ball as well. Joey Bosa, I don't know if we have an exact update on his status for the game, but I believe that I saw he was questionable. Derwin James, their star safety, he is now suspended for a game due to a repeatedly going against NFL rules. I think it's specifically in regards to late hits to the head, things along those lines, but he's going to be out with this game. Bosa is currently listed as questionable, so we're not sure there yet. Junior Colson, one of the top linebackers for the Chargers, also questionable for this game. So I just think that there is so much with this Chargers team that they are just not going to be ready to go this week from a competitive standpoint. And it is a divisional game. We just talked about, the idea of divisional games in that Cowboys and Giants matchup. But I think that this is a situation where you can start to have real concerns with the Chiefs if they don't convincingly win this game. Because I think that even fully healthy, I do believe that the Chiefs are significantly a better team at this point. The Chargers are going to be a well-coached team that's going to keep themselves alive in a number of games and going to stay competitive. But Kansas City is far better. And they should be able to handle business here. If they don't, then we might have some real problems on our hands if you are in Chiefs Nation. And then the last game, just going to highlight it for the sake that it is going to be an excellent game. Bills versus Ravens on Sunday Night Football. The way that I look at this game, the Bills defense has been able to really overachieve up to this point considering all of the losses that they've had on defense. This is going to be a game where they are going to be put to the test because Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry last week, were able to sort of muster up the run game necessary to run for over 270 yards against the Cowboys. Now, that is a Cowboys problem to some degree, of course, the fact that they are one of the worst rush defenses in the NFL, but they actually just held fine for themselves against the Giants last night. And the Bills, on the other hand, are going to be without both of their starting linebackers. Got some positive news in regards to Terrell Bernard, who is working his way back, but I still don't think is going to be available to play in this game. So this is a situation where I think that the Bills are really going to be put to the test in terms of, is this early success on the defense sustainable? Or eventually, are the combination of all of these injuries and losses going to catch up with them? So we are going to, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We're going to be continuing on with the preview of games this weekend, and we are going to be handing out our 5 best bets of the weekend. But before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are going to be handing out our 5 best bets against the spread in the NFL this weekend. We've done pretty well for ourselves, all things considered, through 3 weeks of winning records in each week, but now we get into week 4 where injuries are starting to pile up. We have some key divisional matchups as well, so things are starting to get interesting. And we're going to be starting off here with my number 1 bet of the weekend. We're riding with the team that's done very well for us up to this point, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are on the road against the Indianapolis Colts, and they are favored by 1.5. I think that this is a situation where their defense is going to just continue to help lead them to wins over inexperienced quarterbacks, where last week as well, or I'd say last week it was more so about the fact that Justin Herbert was injured, so a compromised quarterback at that. The week before, you're talking about Bo Nix. And on top of all of that as well, you now come into a matchup against Anthony Richardson, who leads the NFL in interceptions thrown right now, is very erratic. Obviously, he has that very high potential, but in terms of a consistent basis, we haven't really seen it from him yet, and I don't think that this is going to be the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers that we really see it come all together. On top of that as well, we have talked at length earlier this week about the progression of Justin Fields in this Steelers offense, the fact that they sort of took the training wheels off of him a little bit within this past week, let him throw over the middle of the field a little bit more, 11 times, which is a huge step from 0 times in week 1 and 6 times in week 2. So he's getting more acclimated to what Pittsburgh needs from him. You're going against a Colts team that I just don't think is going to be able to have very much success at all against what is an elite Pittsburgh defense. And then additionally, I think the run game could definitely be prominent, and that might also include Justin Fields, who's really yet to fully let loose on the ground. We saw him running a good amount against Atlanta, but I feel like we could start to see some more designed runs from Justin Fields in these next few weeks. I really like the Steelers once again. They've done very well for us up to this point in the year. And betting against the Colts has also been... actually, I can't even say that. We bet on the Colts week 1, and they hit for us. So I'll respect the Colts, but I just don't think that they're ready necessarily to match up with this elite defense on the other end in Pittsburgh. The Seattle Seahawks on the road against the Detroit Lions. This is a tough game, Monday Night Football, so projecting out as well. Don't love that necessarily, but I am still a believer in who the Lions can be. Now, losing their center and Frank Ragnow is a very tough loss for them. Facing a Seahawks team that's undefeated at this point at home, but I think that this is a situation where the Lions are going to start rearing their heads. And I said that last week against the Cardinals. We didn't necessarily see it. The Lions covered for us last week, but made it a lot more difficult than it had to be. So this week, I do think that this is a situation where Seahawks losses are going to, or shortcomings more so, are going to be exposed a little bit more. I'm expecting Aiden Hutchinson to continue to have his name in the Defensive Player of the Year award race, where I just think that Seattle offensive line is a real issue. They are still without Kenneth Murray. It's going to be Zach Charbonnet in the backfield. The Seahawks team, I just don't know how battle-tested they really have been up to this point, where you look at they go to overtime against the Patriots team that's pretty bad. Last week they were able to benefit from playing Skylar Thompson and Tim Boyle at quarterback. That, this upcoming week, I think the pressure is going to be a lot more ramped up. I think that they can still be competitive in the game, but I do feel like Detroit's going to be able to close this one out. And, eyes are definitely on Jared Goff right now, who has not played all that well up to this point in the season. It's a good defense for Seattle. Sounds like their rookie, Byron Murphy, might end up missing this game as well, which could be another big loss for the Seahawks. But I'm rolling with the Lions in this one on Monday Night Football. The Bengals finally pick up a win, in my opinion, against the Carolina Panthers. They are 4.5-point favorites. Now, I know Andy Dalton revenge game is maybe a little bit scary for some, but the reality of the situation is I do feel like the Bengals are just a significantly better team, and Carolina, for as much as a fun story, and I am rooting for them to stay competitive. I like head coach Dave Canales a lot. I'm all for Andy Dalton setting the world on fire once again, but I think that Cincinnati is ultimately going to be, pretty comfortable against Andy Dalton. I think that Joe Burrow is going to be able to put up points against the Panthers, where I have no faith in that Carolina defense. And on the other side, Andy Dalton can still have a good game. I think that this one is going to be a foot race, though, and I think the Bengals are going to come out on top. They are a far more talented offense. Now, again, liked a lot what I saw from the Panthers last week against the Raiders, but I don't think the Raiders are all that good of a team. This is a game that the Bengals quite literally have to have if they have any shot at making the postseason. I think that this is, a small enough deficit that I'm willing to eat the points on the road. I think that both offenses are going to show up, but I think the Bengals, who didn't turn the ball over last week, didn't punt the ball, I think that this time around, they are going to be able to, win a game like that where their offense is just about flawless, but this time their defense can actually provide something for them. So I have them -4.5 against the Panthers. This is a tricky game here, and this is where we're sort of coming to the end of this week's slate and grasping at straws a little bit more. I do have the Cardinals covering -3.5 against the Commanders. Now, it's a tough situation because I'm really rooting for Jaden Daniels. I think he's going to be ultra talented and that he's going to have a great career ahead of him. But Zach Gannon is an excellent defensive-minded coach. Do they have the personnel to be excellent on that side of the ball? Not necessarily just yet, but I think for a defense that has shown an ability to provide a lot of misdirection and such on the defensive side of the ball pre-snap, I think they can coax the Commanders and Jaden Daniels into making some mistakes. Last week, they were as close to flawless as you could get offensively. I don't think that that's going to be the case once again this week. The Cardinals sort of got away from what is, I think, the strength of their offense, which is running the ball. Not to mention that you do have sort of the game breakers on the outside, specifically looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. Not quite sure what the status update on Trey McBride is yet. He was in concussion protocol. He's questionable for the game, so that could be a loss for them, but either way, this is a Washington defense that is a little bit of a sieve. And it's not like Arizona is excellent on the other side, but I think that, again, the strategy of Arizona's defense is going to sort of get Washington to make mistakes that will give them enough of a breathing room. And if Arizona can jump out to an early lead, I think that they should pretty easily be able to close out this game in the run game and having Kyler Murray make the occasional special play. So I have the Cardinals -3.5 at home. I think they're going to be without Justin Herbert. I think that they are going to be without both of their offensive tackles, their best player on defense in Derwin James. And ultimately, I think that the Chiefs they don't have to necessarily. They're 3-0. They don't have to do anything. But I think that they're going to come out and sort of, reestablish themselves as truly the best team in the NFL this week. And they're going to be able to just sort of have their way with the Chargers on both sides of the ball, ideally. I think that, with Joey Bosa questionable, with Derwin James suspended, there aren't too many playmakers on that defensive side of the ball for the Chargers. Not that they're a bad group by any means, but I think that the Chiefs are going to be able to, have a fair amount of success there. Listen, Chargers, reality of the situation, I don't think that their home field advantage really means all that much anyways, because it is one of the worst home field advantages there is in the NFL. Chiefs travel well. I think that this is, again, I know a little bit gross taking this many points, but I think that the Chiefs come into LA and sort of run all over the place. And again, 7's a tough one, but talking about our fifth pick here, usually you have to reach a little bit, and that's where we're going here. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. And we are going to be taking our final break of the show. When we come back on the other side, going to be switching gears a little bit to the NBA, where I do want to discuss yesterday's media day from the Denver Nuggets. The 2023 champions have a little bit of vengeance on their mind after last year. Going to be touching on some of the comments made from head coach Michael Malone, general manager Calvin Booth, and some of the other storylines that came from media day yesterday. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where I just want to give some thoughts on the Denver Nuggets Media Day that occurred just yesterday. Just going to be talking about some of the main storylines moving forward here for the Nuggets. Specifically, I thought it was really interesting some of the comments made from Michael Malone and Calvin Booth in terms of the direction that the Nuggets are headed in this season, because obviously the 2023 champions came up short last year. And, Michael Malone himself multiple times used the word failure in regards to sort of more so the external opinions on where the Nuggets are at, where they don't necessarily feel like they failed last year, losing in Game 7 of the conference semifinals, but they didn't live up to expectations, and he acknowledged that, obviously, especially considering the way that they lost Game 7 and the collapse that was in that game, but they still feel like they are in a situation, as Calvin Booth put it, they have really 10 prime years of Nikola Jokic's prime, and he feels like they are just about halfway through that championship window, that they do still have a number of years in front of them to be able to sort of reach back up towards the top. But obviously, they have lost a number of key members from that championship team over the past couple years. Most notably, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope left in free agency this past offseason, and there is a glaring hole in that starting lineup. And that's sort of what I want to focus on first here, is talking about what Malone's plans are for that starting shooting guard spot. And he made it sound like it's really between two players, and Christian Braun and Julian Strawther. He had a lot of praise for Strawther, by the way, talking about the work that he's put in over the past year or so to be a really nice complementary piece. And the idea of being complementary is something that he also harped on, of not necessarily the best player necessarily to slide into that five, but who can help sort of play into what the rest of the starting lineup needs. And then on the other end as well, who can sort of come off of the bench and provide the necessary attributes, probably more so being more of a leading scorer off of the bench. And pure speculation here, my sort of thought process is that it would be Christian Braun in the starting lineup, Julian Strawther off of the bench. Malone, by the way, did also give a lot of credit to Peyton Watson, who had an excellent year for himself off of the bench last year, but it sounds like Malone is a little bit more comfortable with him having that bench role that can slide into some supplementary minutes with the starting lineup. That I don't think that is going to be the go-to, but talked about the fact that Strawther is, quote, a workhorse, and that he also added, quote, that Watson is, quote, that Strawther is, quote, poised and ready to have a really good second season. He was a very talented scorer and playmaker at Gonzaga a couple seasons ago. So I think that the way that this is going to shape out is that Christian Braun is going to be sort of that glue guy in the starting lineup, and that Strawther is going to have more asked of him running that bench unit, because I really just don't believe that Christian Braun is that necessarily of being an offensive hub, and Strawther might be a little bit more limited. But as for a bench guard, I think that he gives you just about everything that you need. But I also feel like, an interesting part of the areas that Malone was talking about in terms of needing to improve this upcoming season was being better in transition. And he did specifically reference, of course, Russell Westbrook, who made his appearance first time in a Nuggets jersey, that he is going to be a part of that. But he said it's more than just Westbrook himself off of the bench leading that charge. They're going to need more out of their starters as well, where they're just hoping that Malone is hoping in general that this team can push the pace a little bit more. And I don't see why not, because obviously Jokic, it's not like he is the model athlete in terms of explosiveness or anything like that, or coordination necessarily, but Yeah, that's even unfair because he is coordinated. It just looks a little bit wonky at times, but he's somebody who can push the pace himself as a big man grabbing the rebound. It's not like I don't think that he's going to consistently be going coast to coast like that, but it's an option for them. And I think that as well, it just, with his passing vision and IQ, that he can be able to hit guys running up the court to set up what are some good shooters, which is another, I think goes hand in hand with another idea that Malone was talking about during this press conference, was the idea that they don't need to, but he would prefer to see them have a higher volume on three-point attempts, that they have been at the bottom of the league these past couple years, and that is something that was, I don't know if I would call it a fatal flaw, but the fact that the Nuggets far more often than not were getting outshot at the three-point line is something that they definitely need to correct, because you look up and down the roster and the Nuggets do have some good shooters, and Malone also backed up that idea that he is pretty confident overall in the shooters that they have. Talked about, Jamal Murray getting up one or two more threes a game, Michael Porter Jr. getting up one or two more threes a game, and that's where I do feel like to some degree as well, you look at somebody like Julian Strawther, who isn't going to be an elite three-point shooter necessarily, but you look at him or Peyton Watson as guys who should be able to knock down shots for you. I am curious to see whether or not somebody like Hunter Tyson is able to develop some sort of a role for himself. I don't want to just continue sort of listing out young players that could take on bigger roles offensively this year because, it's a little bit arbitrary, but you also look as well at the fact, one last name that I do want to sort of highlight as well is a PJ Hall, who's a big man who can let it fly from three. Trey Alexander. I think that, again, I said I wasn't going to list names, and then I just listed a bunch more. But the point being that I really like the Nuggets draft strategy of these past couple years, where they have just sort of collected a number of late first round picks, early second rounders, and have taken some swings on some very solid college prospects. Now, losing Deron Holmes, who they actually did sort of mortgage a few draft picks to be able to go up and get, and having him, I believe it was a torn ACL that he suffered in Summer League, but he's going to be out for the year. That is a tough loss for them. But I think that you have a lot of good college shooters that are now on the roster. It's a matter of, can they play into everything else? Because another thing that Malone sort of emphasized in this was that he wants to see the Nuggets become a top 3 defense in the NBA. And I don't think that they're necessarily super far off. I mean, the fact that they're losing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is definitely hindering to at least some degree to not have him available to them, that you're probably relying on some of these younger guys more, is a loss of sorts. But again, that's where you look at some of the younger players in a Christian Brown or a Peyton Watson that are going to be expected to have a bigger role for them this upcoming season. Of can they, be non-liabilities offensively? And really for that, with that offense that already has such a defined identity, the biggest part is just sort of, being able to hit corner threes. Maybe you have a Brown and a Watson playing the dunker spot a little bit with Aaron Gordon minutes, on the bench. But this is a team that I don't know if I necessarily see top 3 defense aspirations in their future, but overall a roster that I don't think they're going to be a liability. I think that one is probably a little bit more of a long shot, all things considered, that I don't see them reaching that height, but still important to know that you do have Malone coming into this season with, a real objective of trying to lock down and pay more attention on the defensive side of the ball. But, sort of final thoughts here as well. I want to go back to General Manager Calvin Booth, who talked about the idea that, like I mentioned, said that he feels like there are only they still have another 5 or so seasons left of a championship window with Jokic, and that they want to make sure that they capitalize on that. You see the KCPs head out of the door. You see a Jeff Green who played important minutes for them. You've seen a number of these players sort of leave in free agency. Bruce Brown, another one of them as well, that they are going to need to sort of reload at the same time. But it's also about not being so scared of the luxury tax apron that you just don't pay any players, which is sort of the situation I felt like with KCP. I understand it's extremely difficult to maneuver all of that and continue to be in a competitive position where you can still have roster flexibility. But that's where it sounds like they are rearing in on a contract extension with Aaron Gordon. That specifically, I think it is today, that they are now eligible to have these conversations, that Booth made it sound like that he is pretty confident in that. Aaron Gordon also mentioned when he was answering questions that he is extremely motivated to continue to play on a team as competitive as the Nuggets are. And he talked about his admiration for Jokic and the fact that he is going to be viewed as one of the all-time greats, and that Gordon himself wants to help to, quote, maximize Jokic's time in the NBA. So something to definitely take into consideration there. I feel like the Nuggets are one of these teams where they know what their ceiling is. They understand the greatness. They fell short last year. I don't feel like it was for a lack of motivation or anything along those lines. If you wanted to be a pessimist, by the way, you could probably point to the fact that Jamal Murray, didn't seem to be, overly accepting of questions, and that he didn't seem to necessarily be all in on the media day yesterday. He's coming off of a bad Olympics for Canada this past year. Ultimately, he wasn't great in the playoffs last season. I think that that's reading into it a little bit too much. I mean, a lot of players just don't like doing the whole media gig. So, there is that. But all things considered, I think that the Nuggets understand sort of where they're at, that they need to bounce back this upcoming season. It's going to take, I think it's really going to come down to the depth and seeing which one of those players, many players that I mentioned, can actually step up for them. One other name I will throw in there as well is they added Dario Saric as a veteran presence for them, who we look at the complete lack of really big man help these past couple years. I think that that's going to be very important for them to see if a Saric, or again, I'll go back to PJ Hall, for if they can at least stay alive in the non-Jokic minutes, which was definitely not the case last season. But, overall, Nuggets are in good position to sort of be one of the best teams in the West and in the NBA altogether. I think that they have the single biggest mismatch for the majority of teams, at least for the Boston Celtics as the reigning champions, in Nikola Jokic versus anybody is a mismatch. But ultimately, we'll see whether or not they are able to, put themselves in potential dynasty conversations with another championship, a second in 3 seasons. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. Have a great weekend. We will see you at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Monday afternoon. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.